Hi all. I wanted to take a few minutes to talk about the primary outside reading for this week, Leonard Riskin's article, Law Review article, Further Beyond Reason, Emotions, the Core Concerns, and Mindfulness in Negotiation. And I wanted to do this before class and with a couple of days leading up to class so that you have an opportunity to revisit this reading if you've already read it, or to attend to it with something very much on your mind that's very much on my mind, and the reason why it's assigned right about now in the semester. I think that Leonard Riskin, Professor Riskin, is one of the most effective writers on mindfulness in the law. He's a leading expert in mediation and negotiation, and so he knows his stuff, and he's a long-time meditator of the mindfulness tradition and writing about it. So he does so in a very, I believe, crisp and clear way. Why is this relevant to you all now? A couple of things. First of all, as you're going to begin to think about your papers, you can see how it is that somebody's addressing mindfulness in the legal context and doing so in the way that we tend to write and communicate in the law. Secondly, he is integrating mindfulness with something, fundamental to the practice of law, which is negotiating, and of course business in general, and of course much of the ways that we conduct ourselves when we interact with people and even with ourselves. And so it's a very practical conversation, as well as pragmatically one connected to the craft of the law and our work as lawyers and law students. He also does so by introducing a particular negotiation technique called the core concerns, and uses it to say, here's how something that matters to us as a tool, as a technique, as an understanding intellectually of something can be tethered to and supported by mindfulness. And this is very important in the ways that we're exploring mindfulness, and as you begin to think about your paper in particular, because you'll have some area of interest to you that you could write about without any treatment explicitly of mindfulness. But your paper is not about that topic, be it trial practice or working in the clinics or animal law or whatever it may be. It's about how mindfulness connects up to this. And so he does a really nice job here laying out that analysis and that structure. So I'd like to take another couple of minutes to zero in on sort of a way to start you out and how you might be thinking about this in a way that will be helpful for our class discussion, where we will be talking about the Law Review article. Now, importantly, we did not assign the whole article. I assigned really just a handful of pages. The first, pages 289 to 303, are where he introduces, and I think a very easy to understand and applicable way, the topic of negotiation and how it can go south. And then on pages 308 to 315, he zeroes in on mindfulness. And I should add, when he talks about in the beginning about negotiations and how they can go south, he sets up for you an understanding in just a page or two of the core concerns, what they are, and how he's going to explore that in the paper, both so that the reader understands the core concerns and understands why it is that mindfulness and practicing mindfulness can be helpful for being even more effective at delivering on this particular negotiation technique and enhancing the quality of one's negotiations. So I'm going to drop in on a couple of portions of the first several pages, and we'll begin on the second page on page 291, third page, where he talks about in the middle, it talks about how Gingrich has plenty of company in succumbing to strong negative emotions in situations of conflict. And so this is the environment where there are strong negative emotions in situations of conflict. And as you might imagine, many conflict situations can bring about strong negative emotions. He comments on how in the past several decades, There have been lots of books and articles that have proposed methods for getting beneath the surface in a negotiation. And that much of that has to do with looking at interests, underlying positions and things like that, because having that deeper insight into where somebody else may be coming from can be helpful, both for understanding what's going on and also finding a possible path to resolution. And then on page 292, he gets into the core concerns and says that in 2005, Roger Fisher and Daniel Shapiro, two extraordinary experts in this realm, published a book, Beyond Reason, Using Emotions as You Negotiate, in which they describe how, now he picks up what he spoke to on the previous page, negative emotions can impede, get in the way of, interest-based negotiations. So if you are in a relationship with somebody where you're both where you're keen on and perhaps they're keen on going beneath the surface and looking at what our interests are, and we'll talk in class about that movement from positions to interest. But if you're all sort of game for that, how it is that negative emotions, when they arise, and they often do, can impede that approach, that a very effective approach to negotiating, and how positive emotions can foster it. And in class we'll talk about, and Riskin discusses a little bit, the use of the term positive emotions and negative emotions, because in many ways emotions are useful in many, many ways, helpful data points to understand ourselves and others, and positive and negative is not necessarily so apt. At the same time, we can think of those emotions that are helpful and constructive in the immediate term and feel pleasant, and those that are that lead to counterproductive and unhelpful and don't feel pleasant. And that's the languaging around positive and negative in that sense. So he's saying positive emotions can buoy us and negative emotions can be deleterious. So he says, so they propose a method for dealing with emotions in negotiation indirectly. This is really interesting and important. Through attention to 5 core concerns. And then he lays out these 5 core concerns. And he talks about how if we're attentive to those, it works out well. If we're not so attentive, it may not work out so well. And he talks about using this technique as a lens and as a lever. So in class, I'll be very interested in us having a conversation where we talk about the thesis, how it is as it relates to strong emotions, what can foster and what might inhibit or get in the way of effective negotiation, what these core concerns are, what it's like trying out these core concerns, because even though I haven't asked you to get into the meat of the discussion of the core concerns, just by the cursory review of them and my request in class and on the assignment page that you begin to try it out in your conversations. We'll talk about that in class, what was that like? And what does it mean to use it as a lens, and what does it mean to use it as a lever? We'll discuss that. You might be intrigued enough to jump ahead a couple of pages to gather a little more information in that regard. I would encourage that, but it's not necessary. He then goes on to say that sometimes people, and this is where, because if you think about it, we haven't discussed mindfulness explicitly yet at all. Sometimes people who understand the core concern system, know how to use it, and intend to employ it, either fail to do so or fail to do so skillfully. You ever had it where you sort of had a game plan, you prepared for it, and then, what happened? What happened? When this occurs, it often results from, and this is his assessment, and this ties into our reading this week in chapter 4 on awareness. When this occurs, it often results from deficits or faults in the negotiator's ... awareness. It follows, and this is my principal proposal, he says, that a negotiator can enhance their ability to employ the core concern system, and for our conversation across this semester, a lot of things it might help support. And one good way through improving awareness skills, and one good way to do this, Riskin writes, a method of present moment, non-judgmental awareness, commonly known as mindfulness. And then where the reading picks up in terms of this week's assigned pages 308 to 315, Professor Riskin then begins to give you his, and to the reader who presumably knows nothing of mindfulness, as your readers will presumably know nothing of mindfulness, he then begins to lay out for them a basic understanding of mindfulness, things that we've been discussing in class, the difference between mindfulness and a mindfulness practice, what mindfulness is and what mindfulness means, what some mindfulness practices are. And I believe that you're reading this discussion of mindfulness and seeing how somebody writes about it, I think, in a very clear, cogent, and understandable way as a model for when you'll be writing about mindfulness. You'll find that much of what we've been discussing in class, much of what you've been reading, and much of what you've been learning will be both hopefully expressed in these 7 or 8 pages on mindfulness, like, oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah, and reinforced, and perhaps where there have been little holes in your understanding, your growing understanding of mindfulness, or maybe something we haven't yet gotten to, it could also be information that you find illuminating and helpful. So I'm looking forward to us in class taking a deeper dive into the Leonard Riskin article on the core concerns, on the core concerns technique, on your dipping your toe into beginning to apply the technique in your interactions with others. Many of our interactions are some level of negotiation, and emotions can be pleasant and unpleasant as a part of those conversations, seemingly benign and pedestrian as they are, or consequential and big as they may well be. How it is as a lens and a lever, so check in on that, and why it is that the negotiator's awareness and in cultivating or enhancing the quality of that awareness might be helpful to delivering on the promise that the core concerns approach offers. All right, I hope you found this helpful for better understanding why you're reading it and what it is that we'll be doing with your reading and are beginning to explore this terrain. Know that in the the Mindful Law Student textbook, there is a chapter on negotiation that we will get to, that will build on this, which is why only some of the pages are being read now, and all of the pages will be read at one time. So if you should read more leading up to class this Friday, you'll only be doing yourself a service. But I mention that because we will have a fuller discussion of negotiation, building on this article and other things in several weeks. This piece is using negotiation as the topic or the theme for deepening our understanding of mindfulness, and in particular our considerations of awareness. All right, looking forward to seeing you all in a couple days. Hope you're having a good week, and wishing you well.